The Vorthak surveillance cruiser Silent Talon drifted through the void, its angular hull drinking in the darkness of space like a predator poised in shadow. Commander Vorgul stood motionless on the observation deck, his armored fingers flexing against the grip of his plasma sidearm, a nervous habit he had never managed to purge. The ship's scanners pulsed in steady waves, bathing the distant human outpost in silver-purple light, dissecting its crude defenses with clinical precision. Vorgul's mandibles twitched in quiet disdain. The humans called this place Fort Perseverance, a laughable name for such a fragile cluster of domes and prefabricated alloy walls. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards: kinetic turrets, unshielded reactors, and armor plating that wouldn't withstand a single volley from a Vorthak pulse cannon. He had seen stronger fortifications on backwater mining colonies, yet something about it unsettled him. Beside him, Gromnak, the ship's lead xenologist, adjusted his data slate with a series of rapid clicks. His violet ocular implants flickered as he processed the latest scans. "Their structural integrity is suboptimal," he murmured, the words laced with the metallic resonance of Vorthak's speech. "No energy shielding, no quantum reinforcement, just steel and stubbornness." Vorgul exhaled through his secondary vents, the sound a low, grinding hiss. "They are fools. This outpost is a carcass waiting to be claimed." Gromnak hesitated. "Perhaps. But observe their patrol patterns." Vorgul's gaze sharpened. The human sentries moved with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Their routes overlapped in perfect synchronization. No blind spots, no wasted motion. Every turret had overlapping fields of fire. Every entrance was a kill zone. It wasn't just defense. It was preparation. A flicker of unease coiled in Vorgul's thorax. The humans had no right to be this disciplined. Their species was young, fractious, divided by petty wars and ideological squabbles. They should have been easy prey. His tactical display pinged, an alert from deep scan. He frowned, mandibles parting in disbelief. Buried beneath the outpost's surface, hidden behind layers of rock and lead shielding, was a secondary complex. A labyrinth of tunnels, armories, and most disturbingly, a series of launch silos. Gromnak's ocular implants flared. "Those are not defensive measures." No, they weren't. The humans hadn't built a fortress. They'd built a trap. Vorgul's grip tightened on his weapon. He had seen this before, not in the orderly strategies of the Galactic Conclave, but in the wilds of his homeworld, where cornered beasts turned their own deaths into weapons. The realization struck him like a plasma round to the chest. The humans weren't preparing to hold this outpost. They were preparing to lose it, and take the enemy with them. The tactical display flickered, its silver-purple glow casting jagged shadows across Vorgul's armored face. The data streamed in, cold, precise, undeniable. The human outpost wasn't just a military installation. It was a nest of knives. Gromnak's talons scraped against the console as he adjusted the scan parameters, his ocular implants cycling through spectrums. "They've buried the silos deep," he muttered, his voice a low, grating hum. "Lead lines scatter, dampened. Our initial scans missed them entirely." Vorgul exhaled through his secondary vents, the sound like steam escaping a pressure valve. His mandibles flexed in agitation. The humans had known they would be scanned. They had planned for it, and that was the first wrongness. The Vorthak Dominion had waged war across 100 systems. They had shattered orbital fortresses, glassed rebellious colonies, and broken species that dared resist. Their technology was superior, their discipline unmatched. Yet here, in this forgotten corner of human space, they had walked into a kill box without even realizing it. The second wrongness came when the deep scans finally resolved. The silos weren't just armed, they were counting down. Gromnak's cranial spine stiffened. "I've rigged the entire outpost," he said, his voice hollow. "Thermonuclear payloads. Yield estimates suggest total annihilation radius." Vorgul's blood ran cold. The humans hadn't, just accepted death. They had engineered it. A third wrongness flickered at the edge of the sensors, something deeper, buried beneath, even the silos. Repeating, Gromnak isolated it, his claws moving with surgical precision. The waveform resolved into a transmission, not a distress call, not a surrender. A recording, a human voice, female, calm. This is Major Janet Cross, commanding officer of Outpost Sigma. Faye, if you're hearing this, we're already dead. Vorgul's grip on his weapon tightened. But you're not here for us, are you? The voice continued, almost conversational. You're here because you think this system is weak. Undefended, easy. A pause then, softer. We learned a long time ago, when you can't win a fight, you make sure the other side loses it too. The transmission ended. The countdown hit 0. The world turned white. Next section preview. The Vorthak fleet emerges from the blast radius, scarred, shaken. But the humans aren't done. Deep in the debris field, something stirs. Something that shouldn't have survived. The blast wave dissipated into the void, leaving behind a field of twisted metal and cooling plasma. Vorgul's flagship, the Dusk Talon, emerged from the radiation storm, its silver-purple hull scorched black in patches where the energy shielding had failed. The bridge was silent, save for the low hum of damaged systems rerouting power. Gromnak's claws hovered over his console, the data streams flickering erratically. His secondary eyelids blinked rapidly, a nervous tic he hadn't exhibited since his first combat deployment. The humans had detonated their own outpost, not as a last resort, as an opening move. Vorgul's mandibles flexed, tasting the static, charged air. He had studied human tactics, their wars, their history. He had expected desperation, perhaps even a suicidal last stand. But this was calculated, premeditated. His tactical display flickered to life, revealing the extent of the damage. 3 escort frigates lost entirely, their hulls vaporized in the initial blast wave. 2 more crippled, their weapon systems slagged by the electromagnetic pulse that had followed. The humans had sacrificed a single outpost, a minor installation by all accounts, and in exchange, they had mauled his vanguard. Gromnak's voice was uncharacteristically thin. Commander, the radiation signature. It's not consistent with conventional warheads. Vorgul turned, his armored carapace clicking in agitation. Explain. The scientist's claws danced across the console, pulling up a spectral analysis. The energy decay pattern was wrong. Too sharp, too clean. They didn't just rig their reactors to overload, they weaponized their own fuel. This was a staged collapse, a controlled antimatter cascade. They shaped the blast. A cold weight settled in Vorgul's thorax. That level of precision required calibration, timing, forethought. The humans hadn't just died screaming. They had engineered their deaths into a trap. And then the debris field moved. At first, it was just a flicker on the scanners, a distortion in the wreckage. Then the signal resolved into something impossible. A human dropship, its hull blackened but intact, drifting lazily through the carnage. Gromnak's spines flared. That shouldn't be possible. Nothing could have survived that detonation at that range. Vorgul's combat instincts screamed at him to open fire, to reduce the anomaly to molten scrap. But something stayed his hand. The dropship wasn't maneuvering. It wasn't powering weapons. It was broadcasting. The signal was weak, barely more than a whisper in the static, but the translation matrix locked onto it instantly. A human voice, the same one from before. "You're still here," Major Cross said, her tone almost amused. "Good. That means you're smart enough to know when you're outmatched." A pause, then, softer. "Let's talk." Vorgul's claws tightened around the armrests of his command throne. This wasn't how first contact was supposed to go. The Vorthak were the conquerors, the apex predators, and yet, As he stared at the battered human vessel, he realized something unsettling. The humans weren't prey, they were hunters. The dropship's outer hatch hissed open, venting a thin stream of atmosphere into the void. The Vorthak bridge crew tensed, their claws hovering over weapon controls as the human vessel drifted closer. The translation matrix flickered, struggling with the distorted signal. Major Janet Cross stepped into view. She was smaller than Vorgul expected, compact, unarmored. Her dark uniform singed at the edges from the plasma storm. No helmet, no visible weapons. Just a human woman standing in the wreckage of her own ship, staring directly into the Vorthak flagship's visual scanners as if she could see him through the cold metal and void between them. Gromnock's spines twitched. "She's insane. That ship's integrity is failing. She'll be dead in minutes." Vorgul said nothing, because Cross wasn't just standing there. She was smiling. The airlock cycled with a groan of stressed metal. The human dropship forcibly docked to the Vorthak flagship's ventral hatch. The boarding corridor pressurized, the atmosphere inside, thick with the acrid scent of burnt wiring and human sweat. The Vorthak warriors stationed at the inner lock shifted uneasily, their pulse rifles humming at full charge. Then the hatch opened, Cross stepped through, flanked by a single human soldier, Corporal Coombs, his armor scorched, one arm hanging limp at his side. Neither raised a weapon, neither flinched at the dozen rifles trained on them. Vorgul's mandibles flexed. This was a trap. It had to be. No species willingly walked into the heart of an enemy warship without leverage. Without fear, Cross's gaze swept over the warriors. The flickering violet lighting, the brutalist architecture of Vorthak design. Her expression didn't change. No widening of eyes, no tension in her stance. Just calm assessment, like a predator evaluating new terrain. Gromnock's claws tapped rapidly at his console, scanning the humans for hidden tech, for explosives, for anything that would explain their audacity. The readings came back clean. "They're unarmed," he hissed. "This is a deception." Vorgul didn't need scans to know that. The truth was in the way Cross moved, not like a diplomat, but like a soldier who had already calculated every exit, every threat, every possible outcome of this encounter, and found them acceptable. She stopped just outside rifle range, her voice steady. "You wanted to see what we were made of," she said. "Here we are." A beat of silence. Then Corporal Coombs coughed, spat a mouthful of blood onto the deck, and grinned. Surprise. The Vorthak didn't understand the word, but they understood the tone. The silence that followed Corporal Coombs' blood-stained grin was thick enough to choke on. Vorgul's neural tendrils twitched beneath his armored carapace, his instincts screaming at him to move, to act. But his tactical training locked his limbs in place. The human was wounded, bleeding from a dozen micro fractures where his body had been battered by the gravity surge. Yet his stance was loose, his breathing steady, like a creature that had long since learned to ignore pain. Behind him, Major Cross hadn't so much as flinched. Gromnock's scanners whirred again, desperate for answers, but the readings remained unchanged. No hidden weapons, no energy signatures, just two humans standing in the heart of a Vorthak warship, surrounded by enough firepower to glass a continent, and they were smiling. Vorgul's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a millisecond, recalibrating his vision to the harsh silver-purple glow of the command deck. The humans should have been trembling, begging, dying. Instead, Cross tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then the lights went out, not just the illumination. Every system in the chamber died at once. The holographic displays winked into nothingness. The weapon consoles powered down with a hollow thunk. Even the omnipresent hum of the ship's reactors stuttered into silence. For 3 heartbeats, the Vorthak stood frozen in perfect darkness. Then the emergency lighting flared to life, bathing the room in a dim violet haze. The humans hadn't moved. Cross's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. You scanned us for weapons. She took a single step forward. The deck plating groaned under her boot. You didn't scan the air. Gromnock's claws spasmed around his console. His neural interface was still dark, unresponsive, no diagnostics, no alarms, nothing. The realization hit him like a plasma round to the thorax. The humans hadn't smuggled in weapons. They'd breathed them in. Microscopic machines, drifting through the ventilation systems, slipping past every scanner, because they weren't tools. They were dust. And now they were rewriting the ship's systems from the inside out. Vorgul's combat implants flared to life, his adrenal glands flooding his bloodstream with combat stimulants. He lunged for Cross, his serrated forearm blades snapping free with a metallic hiss. She didn't dodge. She caught his wrist mid-swing, her grip crushing the armored joint with a sound like grinding steel. For the first time in his life, Vorgul felt fear. Human bones weren't supposed to be that strong. Human reflexes weren't supposed to be that fast. And human eyes weren't supposed to glow in the dark. A faint blue light pulsed beneath Cross's skin, tracing the veins in her hands, her neck, her temples. Not bioluminescence, cybernetics. The Vorthak had assumed humanity's technology was crude, outdated. They'd been wrong. Cross leaned in, her voice a whisper. You wanted to see what we were made of. Behind her, Coombs cracked his knuckles. The sound echoed like gunfire in the dead silence of the ship. Now you do. And the Indomitable opened fire. The Indomitable did not simply fire, it unleashed. Vorgul had seen war. He had commanded fleets that reduced worlds to glass, had watched the silver-purple fury of Vorthak plasma lances carve through enemy formations like a blade through flesh. But this was something else. The human vessel moved, not in the rigid, predictable arcs of standard naval combat, but with a fluid, almost organic grace. It twisted between salvos of Vorthak artillery, its armored hull shimmering with an eerie, adaptive refraction field that scattered incoming fire into harmless fractals of light. The ship didn't just evade, it danced, and then it struck back. Railgun batteries roared, their hypersonic slugs punching through Vorthak shields as if they weren't even there. The impacts didn't just breach hulls, they disintegrated them, the kinetic force liquefying entire decks in milliseconds. Plasma lances, once thought to be the pinnacle of energy weaponry, were met with human, designed pulse shields that absorbed the blasts, converting the energy into fuel for their own reactors. Vorgul's mandibles twitched involuntarily. This wasn't warfare as he knew it. This was predation, and the humans were the apex hunters. Gromnock, the Vorthak scientist, watched from the tactical display with a growing sense of horrified awe. His claws trembled as he analyzed the data streams flooding in. The human ship's maneuvers defied logic. No species should have been able to sustain those G-forces, to recalculate trajectories mid-combat with such flawless precision. Then he saw it. The Indomitable wasn't just a ship. It was a hive. Microscopic drones swarmed through its corridors, repairing damage before it could cripple systems. Neural networks pulsed through its architecture, making decisions faster than any organic crew could, and at its heart, a human mind. Major Cross's cybernetic implants weren't just enhancements. They were symbiotic. She wasn't merely commanding the ship. She was merged with it, her thoughts and reflexes woven into its very structure. Gromnock's spines flattened against his carapace. The Vorthak had always believed themselves the masters of war, but humanity had perfected it. Coombs grinned as he tore through another squad of Vorthak shock troops. His armor wasn't just plating. It was alive, shifting to reinforce where impacts landed, sealing wounds before they could bleed. The rifle in his hands wasn't a tool. It was an extension of his will. Its targeting system slaved directly to his neural interface. He didn't need to aim. He only needed to think. The Vorthak had come expecting to face soldiers. They were facing evolution. Vorgul staggered back. His forearm blades shattered, his armor cracked. Cross stood before him, her veins still pulsing with that unnatural blue light. She didn't gloat, she didn't sneer, she simply looked at him, and in that gaze, Vorgul saw something ancient, something primal, the same look his ancestors had given their prey. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as reckless. Unworthy now, it would learn the truth. Humans didn't just survive, they conquered. The memory struck Vorgul like a plasma round to the chest. Sudden, searing, impossible to ignore. It had been during the first cultural exchange, back when the Vorthak High Command still believed humanity could be managed. A simple wargame simulation, meant to showcase Vorthak tactical superiority. Their commanders had laughed when the humans arrived without powered armor, without plasma rifles, just their primitive ballistic weapons, and those unsettling, unblinking stares. The simulation had been a slaughter, but not in the way the Vorthak expected. Gromnak had been there, his data pad recording every second, his scientific detachment crumbling with each passing minute. The humans moved wrong. They didn't fight in disciplined phalanxes or honor-bound duels. They cheated. They used the terrain like living tissue, digging into it, reshaping it, turning the simulation's pristine battlefield into a nightmare of tunnels and ambush points. They didn't just shoot. They baited, lured Vorthak squads into kill zones, where every angle was a muzzle flash, every shadow a knife. And then there was Cross. She hadn't even been a major then, just a lieutenant, her uniform still bearing the scars of some forgotten Earth conflict. She didn't speak much, didn't need to. Her soldiers watched her the way pack predators watched an alpha, not with fear, but with certainty. When the Vorthak sent their elite shock troops to break the human line, Cross didn't fall back. She smiled. The memory burned in Vorgul's mind now as he faced her again, his armor cracked, his blades broken. That same smile was on her lips, not cruel, not gloating, calculating. The humans hadn't just adapted to war. They had perfected it. They didn't fight for honor, or territory, or even survival. They fought because it was what they were. And now, as Cross stepped forward, her veins still pulsing with that eerie bioluminescent blue, Vorgul understood the truth. The galaxy had made a fatal mistake. It had assumed humanity was just another species to be cataloged, controlled, or crushed. But humanity wasn't a species, it was a force, and forces didn't negotiate. They erased. Vorgul's breath came in ragged, metallic rasps, the filtration systems of his damaged helmet struggling to compensate. The air smelled of ionized plasma and scorched steel, the aftermath of a battle that had not gone as planned. His secondary heart thrummed erratically, a biological failsafe kicking in as adrenaline, and something darker, something like dread, flooded his veins before him. Cross stood motionless, her armor streaked with the violet, black ichor of Vorthak shock troops. The bioluminescent traceries beneath her skin pulsed in time with her heartbeat, casting eerie blue shadows across the ruined battlefield. She wasn't even breathing hard. That was what unsettled him most. The Vorthak were warriors bred for war, their bodies honed by generations of conflict, their minds unclouded by hesitation. They did not tire, they did not falter, and yet, here was this human, this creature, standing amid the wreckage of his finest soldiers, as if she had merely taken a brisk walk through a garden. Behind her, the remnants of her unit moved with the same eerie precision. Coombs, the one they called the Reaper, reloaded his rifle with mechanical efficiency, his eyes never leaving the perimeter. Others tended to wounds with clinical detachment, as if pain were an afterthought. Gromnak's voice crackled over the comms, strained with disbelief. Their physiology, it shouldn't be possible. The stimulants they're using, their bodies should be tearing themselves apart. Vorgul didn't respond. He didn't need to. The evidence was before him. The humans weren't just enduring, they were thriving. Cross tilted her head slightly, studying him the way a surgeon might study a specimen. There was no hatred in her gaze. No triumph, just assessment. Then she did something that sent a primal shiver down his spine. She nodded. The ground beneath the Vorthak positions erupted in a storm of fire and shrapnel. Not from artillery, not from orbital strikes, but from charges the humans had buried days ago. They had known. They had planned for this. Vorgul's tactical display flickered, his HUD scrambling as electromagnetic pulses tore through the battlefield. The humans weren't just fighting, they were orchestrating. Every retreat, every feint, every casualty, calculated. And now, as the dust settled, Cross stepped forward again, her rifle slung casually over one shoulder. "You're wondering," she said, her voice calm, almost conversational, "how we knew." Vorgul's mandibles twitched. She smiled. It wasn't a predator's smile. It was a teacher's. And in that moment, Vorgul understood the true horror of humanity. They didn't just wage war, they studied it. And they were very good students. The battlefield fell silent, save for the crackle of burning metal and the distant hum of human drones sweeping the wreckage. Vorgul stood motionless, his armored plates still vibrating from the concussive force of the detonations. His tactical display flickered back online, painting the devastation in harsh silver. Purple diagnostics, entire Vorthak positions reduced to smoldering craters, their once impenetrable fortifications now little more than twisted alloy and scattered bodies. The humans had not just anticipated their strategy, they had scripted it. Major Cross walked toward him, her boots crunching over shattered debris. She moved with the casual confidence of someone who had already seen the battles end before the first shot was fired. Behind her, Corporal Coombs and a squad of EXO, armored soldiers fanned out, their weapons not raised but ready. A silent promise that restraint was a choice, not a limitation. Vorgul's neural interface pulsed with incoming data from Gromnok, still hidden in the command bunker. The scientist's transmission was frantic, laced with disbelief. Their predictive algorithms, they mirror our own tactical archives, but refined, perfected. How is this possible? Cross stopped just outside of traditional Vorthak engagement range, close enough to speak, far enough to react. She tilted her head, studying Vorgul with an unsettling familiarity. "You think this is new for us," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "But war is the oldest human art." A holographic projection flickered to life from her wrist unit, displaying a scrolling timeline, Terrace history, not as a record of civilization, but as a ledger of conflict. Ancient phalanxes clashing in mud and blood. Trenches swallowing millions in the mire of industrialized slaughter. Orbital fortresses shattered in the first interstellar wars. Every era, every atrocity, every lesson. Vorgul's mandibles tightened. The Vorthak Dominion had prided itself on its mastery of war, honed over millennia of conquest. But this was different. Humanity's wars were not just fought, they were dissected, their failures and victories codified into something darker, more refined. Cross tapped the hologram, freezing it on a single image. A human general from pre-spaceflight history, standing before a map marked with strategies eerily similar to the trap the Vorthak had just walked into. "Sun Tzu," she said, "know your enemy, know yourself. 1,000 battles, 1,000 victories." Gromnok's voice crackled in Vorgul's auditory receptors. Quieter now, almost reverent. "They didn't just predict us. They understood us, better than we understand ourselves." The realization settled like a blade between Vorgul's thoracic plates. The humans had not won through superior firepower or technology alone. They had won because they had learned, not just from their own wars, but from the wars of every species foolish enough to challenge them. Cross closed the hologram. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Not triumphant, not cruel, just patient, the way a teacher waits for a student to finally see. And in that moment, Vorgul understood the true depth of his mistake. The galaxy had feared the Vorthak for their brutality. but it would fear humanity for their wisdom. The silence in the command chamber was thick, oppressive, like the charged air before a storm. Vorgul's claws flexed against the cold metal of the holotable, his mind still reeling from the revelation. The human commander, Cross, stood before him, her posture relaxed. Yet her eyes held something ancient, something predatory. It was not the look of a conqueror. It was the look of something that had survived the dark for millennia and remembered. Gromnock's voice, when it came, was stripped of its usual arrogance. Their tactics, they are not just reactive, they are adaptive, evolutionary. The Vorthak scientist's cranial spines twitched in agitation, his neural tendrils flickering with disturbed energy. They do not merely counter us, they mirror us. Cross tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. The dim lighting of the chamber cast sharp shadows across her face, deepening the hollows beneath her eyes. She looked, for a moment, like something carved from the same unforgiving steel as the Vorthak warships. Then she spoke. "You fight to dominate." Her voice was quiet, almost conversational. "We fight to survive." A shudder ran through Vorgul's exoskeleton. He had seen the records, the wars of Earth, centuries of blood and fire, civilizations rising and collapsing in cycles of destruction. He had dismissed them as the struggles of a primitive species, chaotic and unrefined. But now, he saw the truth. Every battle, every massacre, every desperate last stand, humanity had learned, and they had remembered. Gromnock's claws tapped nervously against his data, pad their neural archives. They do not just store information, they weaponize it. His voice dropped to a whisper. "They have studied us. Not just our technology, our psychology, our instincts." Cross exhaled, slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the scent of prey. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is based on deception. She tapped a single finger against the holotable, and the projection shifted, showing not just the battle they had just lost, but dozens of others, human conflicts, alien wars, galactic skirmishes centuries old. All of them followed the same patterns. All of them ended the same way. "You think in terms of strength," Cross continued, her voice a blade wrapped in silk. "We think in terms of weakness. It doesn't matter. The goal is the same." Vorgul's mandibles tightened. He had commanded fleets. He had broken worlds. He had stood before the High Conclave and declared humanity nothing more than another species to be crushed beneath the Vorthak war machine. Now he stood in the wreckage of his own arrogance, staring into the eyes of a creature that had turned survival into an art form. Cross leaned forward, just slightly. "You came here to teach us fear." Her smile was a razor. "Instead, you learned it." Gromnock made a sound, a low involuntary click of distress. Vorgul said nothing, because for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to say. The galaxy had feared the Vorthak for their brutality, but it would fear humanity for something far worse. Not because they were stronger, but because they had already lost everything once. And they would never lose again. The void between stars was never truly silent. Vorgul knew this. He had spent his life in the cold embrace of space, where the only sounds were the hum of engines, the crackle of comms, and the distant, indifferent whisper of cosmic radiation. But now, as his flagship Dusk Talon hung in the shadow of the human fleet, he heard something else, something that coiled in his thorax like a living thing. Anticipation. The human warships were not like Vorthak vessels, where his people built with brutal efficiency, sharp angles, exposed weapon nodes, the harsh silver, purple glow of plasma conduits. The human fleet was a study in controlled asymmetry. Their hulls were layered, segmented, like the carapace of some ancient predator that had evolved to endure rather than dominate. Their armor was not polished to a mirror sheen but matte, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, swallowing scans like a black hole swallowed stars. And their weapons, Gromnock's talons, twitched over the tactical display, his neural interface flickering with analysis. The human railgun batteries were not merely mounted, they were embedded, woven into the superstructure of their ships like the fangs of a serpent, retracted until the moment of strike. Their missile silos were not exposed, but hidden behind armored shutters that only opened in the microseconds before launch. Even their point defense systems were not static turrets, but adaptive clusters, shifting position like the eyes of a hunting pack tracking prey. This was not a fleet. This was a trap. Vorgul's mandibles flexed. His instincts screamed at him to attack, to unleash the full might of the Dusk Talon's plasma lances and watch the human ships burn. But something deeper, something primal, held him still, because he had seen human eyes before. In the recordings of their wars, in the aftermath of their colonies, in the face of Major Cross as she spoke of loss like it was a weapon. And now, as the human fleet drifted closer, their engines flaring not with the aggressive pulse of a charge, but the slow, deliberate burn of an advance, he realized they were not here to fight. They were here to demonstrate. Gromnock's voice was a whisper. Their formation, it's not defensive, it's enveloping. Vorgul did not need the scientist to tell him. The human ships were moving in perfect synchronicity, not in the rigid, hierarchical patterns of Vorthak doctrine, but in something fluid, alive. They did not hold position. They flowed, each vessel adjusting to the others without hesitation, without command, like wolves, like hunters. A single transmission, no demands, no threats, just a data packet compressed and clean. Vorgul opened it, and the bridge of the Dusk Talon went utterly still. It was a recording, not as it was now, not the fortified bastion humanity had rebuilt, but as it had been. The skies choked with ash, the oceans boiling, the last cities crumbling under orbital bombardment, the silence, the slow, terrible realization that this was not the end. It was the beginning. Gromnock made a sound like a dying machine. Vorgul said nothing because he understood. Now, the humans had not come to destroy the Vorthak. They had come to show them what destruction truly meant. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, Vorgul felt something he had never known. Not of death, but of survivors. The recording ended. Silence swallowed the bridge of the Dusk Talon, thick and suffocating, like the weight of a dead star pressing down on them all. Vorgul's claws flexed against the command console, the metal groaning under the pressure. His secondary heart thrummed too fast, too loud, a drumbeat of primal unease. Across the tactical display, the human fleet held position, not advancing, not retreating. Gromnock's spines rattled, a subsonic vibration of distress. His ocular membranes flickered, struggling to process what he had just witnessed. The data was undeniable. The footage, raw, unfiltered, showed a species that had not merely endured annihilation, but learned from it, and then weaponized it. Vorgul exhaled through his secondary vents, the sound a hiss of pressurized air. His mind raced, reassessing every scrap of intelligence the Vorthak Dominion had ever gathered on humanity. They had dismissed them as fractured, emotional, weak, a species too busy fighting amongst themselves to pose a true threat. A fatal error because the humans had not rebuilt their world in the image of peace. They had reforged it in fire. The realization settled into Vorgul's bones like radiation, inescapable, corrosive. The humans had not come to negotiate. They had not come to plead for mercy. They had come to demonstrate. A lesson written in the ashes of their own past. On the view screen, the lead human vessel, Iron Resolve, its designation flickered in Vorthak script, hung motionless. Its armor was a patchwork of scars, each one a story, a battle survived. Its weapons were not polished, not ceremonial. They were worn, like the fangs of an old predator. Gromnock finally spoke, his voice a strained rasp. They do not fear us. Vorgul did not answer. Because the truth was worse, the humans did not fear the Vorthak, because they had already faced something far more terrible. Themselves, and they had won. A chime sounded, incoming transmission, not from the fleet. From the planet below, Vorgul activated it. A single human face filled the screen, Major Janet Cross. Her eyes were the color of old steel, and in them, Vorgul saw something that made his blood run cold. Recognition, not of an enemy, of a kindred spirit. She did not speak. She didn't need to. The message was clear. We are both predators, but only one of us has learned what happens when the hunt never ends. The transmission cut. The silence returned, heavier than before. Vorgul turned his gaze back to the fleet, and for the first time in his life, he understood the true meaning of war. Not as conquest, not as glory, but as a language. And humanity had just spoken it perfectly. The silence in the command spire was thick enough to choke on. Vorgul stood motionless before the tactical display, his claws retracted, his spines flattened against his skull. The holographic remnants of the human fleet still flickered. Those impossible ships, their brutal efficiency, the way they had moved like a single organism behind him. Gromnock's secondary eyelids flicked rapidly, his data slate forgotten in his grip. The scientist had spent cycles analyzing human warfare, their history, their tactics, their psychology. He had thought he understood. He had been wrong. The humans had not fought like conquerors. They had fought like survivors, and that was infinitely more terrifying. On the surface of the contested world, Major Janet Cross exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the visor of her helmet for a fraction of a second before the climate controls whisked it away. Around her, the battlefield lay still. Smoldering wrecks of Vorthak armor, the scorched earth where their energy lances had carved molten scars into the soil. Corporal Coombs shifted beside her, his rifle still raised, his knuckles white. They're not advancing. Cross didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had seen the look in the Vorthak commander's eyes when their gazes locked through the transmission. That moment of recognition, not hatred. Understanding. The Vorthak were apex predators. They had built an empire on the bones of lesser species, their ships designed for intimidation, their weapons forged to inspire terror. But humanity? Humanity had spent millennia hunting each other. They had turned war into an art. They had outgrown it. Aboard the Vorthak flagship, Vorgul finally turned away from the display. His officers stood frozen, their spines twitching in agitation, their claws flexing unconsciously. They expected orders, a counterattack, a final desperate strike. Instead, Vorgul activated the comb. Stand down. The words were not a request. They were not a surrender. They were an acknowledgement. The humans had not come to conquer. They had come to teach, and the lesson was simple. We have seen the abyss, and we walked away. Gromnock found Vorgul later, standing before the observation deck, his gaze fixed on the planet below. The human ships still lingered in orbit, not as invaders, but as sentinels. They could have destroyed us, Gromnock said softly. Vorgul's spines rippled. Yes, but they didn't. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Gromnock hesitated. What do we do now? Vorgul exhaled, long and slow. We learn, because that was the true horror of humanity. Not their weapons, not their tactics, but their mercy, and the terrible, unspoken truth behind it. They had needed none in return. On the surface, Cross finally lowered her rifle. Coombs glanced at her. Think they got the message? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. She turned her face toward the sky, where the Vorthak fleet hung motionless against the stars. They got it. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy held its breath. Epilogue. The silent reckoning. The Vorthak High Command received the data packets in absolute silence. Battle recordings, damage assessments, weapon schematics, and most damning of all, the unedited footage of human soldiers standing amid the wreckage of a Vorthak fortress, rifles lowered, watching as the enemy limped away. No pursuit, no executions, just letting them go, High Executor Krazal's claws flexed against the polished obsidian of the war table, his bioluminescent veins pulsing a dull, uneasy violet. The other warlords shifted, spines twitching in agitation. They could have burned our fleet from the sky, growled Tharks of the Iron Maw brood. Why didn't they? Krazal exhaled, mandibles clicking. Because, he said slowly, they wanted us to see this. A hologram flickered to life above the table. A human warship. Its hull scarred but unbroken, hanging in orbit like a specter. Not a conqueror, not a destroyer. The implications settled over them like a crushing weight. Humanity had not come to annihilate them. They had come to demonstrate, with terrifying clarity, that they could have. And worse, that restraint, not bloodshed, had been their choice. Across the galaxy, whispers began to spread. The Crothian matriarchy recalled their raiding fleets from human border systems. The Urix consortium quietly reopened trade negotiations. And in the dark between the stars, the Vorthak did something they had not done in 10,000 years of conquest. They hesitated on Earth, in a dimly lit command center. Admiral Vance leaned back in his chair, watching the reports filter in. "Think I tell Stick?" asked his aide. Vance smirked. Outside the window, Earth's orbital defense platforms hummed softly, their guns idle but very much awake. Some lessons, after all, only needed to be taught once.